What's up everyone, it's Victon here with another Path of Exile build guide. Today we're going to be going over the in-game version of a low-life ES Dominating Blow Necromancer. As you can tell from the gameplay showcase, the damage and tankiness is nothing short of amazing. While boss fights can start out a bit slow, once you have your minions out, you rock 50 million Shaper DPS with over 8.4k ES, 90% max all-res, and several other defensive layers. Your defenses are crazy strong. With this build, I've cleared deathless runs for Shaper, Uber Elder, Cyrus 8, and Tier 16 juiced 100% Delirious maps. Before we get into the full build guide though, if you end up enjoying this guide or any of my other mini Path of Exile guides, do consider liking the video and subscribing for more content just like this. Also, if you're interested in supporting the channel, check the video description below for a link to my Patreon, where you can support the channel and get some benefits like gain access to my community Discord server where we chat about these builds, and I help people out with their characters and build reviews in general. Also, big shout out to WaffleT on the forums. I'll have a link to his guides in the description. His forum guides inspired the base of this build and he has a great write-up on it, so definitely check it out if you're interested. Anyways, let's move on to a quick intro here about the build differences between this and my Carrion Golem ES Lowlife Necromancer, because the builds are very similar layout-wise but have a very different playstyle. Short version is Dominating Blow ends up being about 6 to 8 exalts cheaper because we don't have to get those primordial jewels, so a big win there. It also ends up having double the boss damage, coming in at 50 million in the min-max version. You also end up with about 1000 more energy shield than the Carrion Golem build, as well as more ES regen per second, so overall a bit more defensive. All that sounds great, so why would you ever play Carrion Golems over, say, Dominating Blow? Well, it honestly just comes down to personal taste and playstyle. Dominating Blow is very interactive, where you're going to be in the mix with your minions becoming one with the Wrecking Ball, whereas Carrion Golems you get to kind of run around in circles, drink your sweet tea while you melt everything around you. It's just a different feel, and some people might prefer one or the other. Like I said, a huge benefit for Dominating Blow is the insane DPS it puts out when you have all your minions out. 50 million Shaper DPS is near double the Carrion Golem setup, and for 8 exalts less than the Carrion Golem build. That is pretty significant. And overall, I gotta say the playstyle was pretty refreshing and actually quite fun. Also, Tier 16 100% Delirious maps are much easier on the Dominating Blow setup versus the Carrion Golem setup. As far as boss fights, Uber Elder and Shaper are probably easier on Dominating Blow, but for Cyrus, I'd actually give Carrion Golems the first place medal on that one, as Dominating Blow takes a few seconds to ramp up its damage. Overall though, I'd say it really comes down to personal playstyle preference, and both builds are absolutely fantastic and completely melt all the content in the game. Anyways, with all that being said, let's go ahead and move on straight into the skill tree section. Alright, so first things first here, we're going to be using the desktop app Path of Building. A link's going to be in the description for you to download it if you don't already have it. And it's very important to note that if you get an error in your Path of Building, it's because you're not using the Path of Building I have linked in the description. We're going to be using the Community Fork Path of Building, and it's updated more frequently, and just in general it's overall much better than the original, so make sure you get a copy of that one. Once you get it, just copy the POB Pasteman link in the description of this video, then we're going to open up the app, go to the top left here and click Import Export Build, and then click Import from Pastebin, and then paste the link here into this and click Import, and you should be good to go. So the way I do my Path of Buildings is I typically have a leveling guide built in, so you can see how to level it up from start to finish, from your first lab all the way up to 100 character. The leveling process with this build compared to my, say, Carrion Golem Life version is actually quite similar in some aspects, but very different in others, so I will be briefly walking y'all through how to level up this build. You'll want to first grab some life right here, some dex and strength right there, and then go up and grab that extra zombie and skeleton, which by the way here, we're going to be using a skelly zombie combo to level up. And what I do is I put both in a tabula rasa, so basically get to 5 links. I'll have skellies and zombies with minion damage, multi-strike, brutality, and melee fizz in the 6-link tabula rasa. And from there, we just go up and grab some more minion damage nodes, and then we come down here and grab some more life. And next, we're basically just doing a good bit of traveling and grabbing some life along the way, up until you get the +1 to maximum Spectre, Zombie, and Skeleton. Now, a quick note here, while leveling up, make sure you use Vitality, it really helps your minions stay alive. You're going to pick it up at level 10. Also, if you're really struggling to keep your minions alive, try adding in Convocation, or take these nodes here on the tree, which you'll spec out of later but are very good for leveling up. Or lastly, you could use a Wraith Lord helmet if it's your Spectres that keep dying. And while we're on the topic of specters, what I'd suggest leveling up with is Cannibal Fire Eaters from Act 1, The Ledge, until you get to Act 5, where you can pick up Slave Drivers from the control box. And then lastly, once you get to Act 7, you're going to be able to get your in-game specters, with 1 Carnage Chieftain and 1 Host Chieftain, until you get that 3rd specter, at which point you're going to add in a 2nd Carnage Chieftain. Moving on. From there, we're just going to start picking up Aura Reservation nodes, so we can start getting more and more auras rolling. And from there, we just get some more life and energy shield nodes, and more Aura Reservation nodes, as well as a Fortress of Covenant if you can get a hold of one at this point. It's a fantastic jewel that helps your minions survive and gives them some great damage. After that, you should be reaching maps and start dropping life nodes to switch over to the low life ES version. We're going to cover the gearing options there more in the gear section. With that, switch over and start getting some more ES nodes as well as Zealot's Oath to make our life regen convert to energy shield regen per second. This is a huge node, so make sure you pick it up. We also want to grab an Energy from Within jewel for great energy shield bonus. If you can't afford this, don't worry, just get a super cheap energy shield, minion damage, and strength jewel. They're typically under 5 chaos. Next, we pick up 2 large cluster jewels. Ideally, you want 2 large cluster jewels with Renewal and Rotten Claws, and hopefully some strength as well, since getting strength for gym requirements can be a bit tricky in this build. From there, we're going to grab our 4 medium cluster jewels, each having First Among Equals and Replenishing Presence, as well as some strength if you can. If you can't get strength on these, it's always okay to pick up that plus 30 strength node on the tree in the meantime. And for our last nodes, we just finish out our medium cluster jewels, as in our in-game build we are using 6 passive cluster jewels. And from there, just finish up picking up the energy shield cluster right here. I'll also note here that one of our last upgrades is a Watcher's Eye. It's going to have up to 2.5% ES regen per second while affected by Discipline. And if you really want to go crazy, you can get one like this, with X% of physical damage taken as fire while affected by Purity of Fire. You can also get the Purity of Ice version as well, since fire and cold both have 90% max elemental resistances. Just getting one of these mods is only about an Exalt or 2, but getting both will cost anywhere between 10 and 15x. So again, like I said, one of our last upgrades. Now for our Ascendancy, we are going Necromancer, mainly because we get so much added damage from having so many different auras. It turns out to be a crazy amount of damage. Our first 2 points in Necromancer will go into Mindless Aggression for just some extra damage. Our next 2 points will go into Unnatural Strength for +2 to all minion skill gems, and this is a huge damage boost. For your Merciless Lab, you'll have likely switched over or will be soon to the low life ES version by this point, so you're going to be picking up Commander of Darkness for that insane damage boost, since we're going to be running so many different auras. Lastly, for your Uba Lab, you get Bone Barrier for a ton of defense with physical damage reduction, ES recovery rate, and a free Bone Armor skill that we're going to put on our left click for a free 2.2k damage shield every 5 seconds. And that's it for our skill tree section, so let's go ahead and move on to our gym setup. Now, for our Dominating Blow setup, we're going to be using a Divergent Multi-Strike, which gives 10% increased attack speed. And we get this because the Awakened Multi-Strike is mad expensive, so go ahead and get that Divergent version until you can afford the Awakened Multi-Strike. We also get a Minion Damage, Brutality, Melee Fizz, and then we use a Melee Splash for mapping, and swap that out for a Damage on Full Life for in-game bosses. Getting Awakened gems on all of those gems except Damage on Full Life as you can afford them. For our gloves, we want the following gems, and specifically in this order as you can see here. It's very important to get the links right. It's a 3-link and a 1-link. You have Raised Spectre, Blood Magic, and Divergent Vitality, which gives us 20% increased damage to your minions while on full life. And then unlinked to those, you have an Anomalous Flame Dash, which gives you further dash travel distance. For your Spectres, you're going to be wanting to use, like I said earlier, 2 Carnage Chieftains, which gives you and your minions Frenzy Charges, and 1 Host Chieftain, which gives you guys Power Charges. And if you end up getting 4 Spectres, we're also going to throw in a Thy of Toll, which gives you a damage reduction buff. The Chieftains come from Act 7 in Ashen Fields, and the Thy of Toll comes from Toll's Breachstone. I would also note here that for Tier 16 100% Delirious maps, I definitely make sure that I swap out 1 Carnage Chieftain for a Thy of Toll if I don't have 4 maximum. It ends up giving us a decent defense boost and is well worth the switch. Now for our boots, you're going to need 1 2-link and then 2 single sockets. We go with a Generosity Dread Banner in the 2-link, and then a Precision and Purity of Lightning. And again, make sure you do not link the precision here, because we actually want that accuracy for ourselves. If you don't have precision here on level 20, your hit chance is going to be very low and it's going to feel very bad. Now for our helmet, we're going to have Animate Guardian, Maim, Feeding Frenzy, and Raise Zombies. And while we're on the Animate Guardian topic, let's quickly go over how you should set up your Animate Guardian. Now that when they die, they don't lose their gear, you can actually just resummon them. The Animate Guardian adds a ton of damage and survivability, so it's very important to not overlook this guy. For the boots, we're going to be giving him a pair of Victario's Flight. If you want, you can also have a corrupted pair that gives him attack dodge. For the gloves, we actually get a defense item here, not a curse anymore like we used to. We just pick up a cheap pair of Southbound gloves. For the helmet, we just give him a rare helmet with the mod -9 to nearby enemy physical resistance. This turns out to be a ton of extra damage, and you actually don't need any other stats on this, just that one mod. For the weapon, we do give him a Kingmaker, which gives us and our minions a whopping 50% crit multi, Culling Strike, and permanent Fortify. It's actually insane, so getting this up and running as soon as possible is highly advised. For our chest, we actually have a new addition here. We're going to grab a Garb of the Ephemeral, which gives us a buff where we cannot be crit. This is a huge defensive boost, and on top of that, it comes with nearby allies' action speed cannot be modified below base value, so you'll never be slowed by Chill, for example, on the Uber Elder fight. These are a bit expensive, but completely worth it. A cheaper option would be just to buy one with nearby enemies are blinded. And that's it for our Animate Guardian, so let's go ahead and go back to our skill gems. In our shield, we have a Vol Haste, Purity of Ice, and Pride. And in our weapon, we have a Convocation, Divergent Flesh Offering, which gives an additional 10% attack speed, and a Stone Golem. Now, I got a weapon with a blue and red socket and then a white socket, so I could swap Convocation for Desecrate when I was on in-game bosses, knowing that I wouldn't be able to Desecrate for Flesh Offering without it. Lastly, we have our two unset rings, and in our first one we have Discipline, and in our second one we have a Purity of Fire. And that rounds it out for our gems, so let's go ahead and move on to our gear. Okay, so first and foremost here is our weapon. You're going to be wanting to pick up the Scourge, which gives you and your minions a ton of damage since you're going to be attacking frequently alongside your minions. For our helmet, we pick up a Vertex, which has great energy shield and chaos resistance, and +1 to socketed gems, which helps your zombies and Animate Guardian be a bit tankier. Ideally, you'd want one of these two enchants, with number 1 being increased attack speed from Flesh Offering, and number 2 being Dominating Blow summons additional sentinels. But that's going to be very rare, so expect to pay a premium, and honestly it's not even that noticeable for damage, so I'd wait and upgrade that until maybe one of your last upgrades. For our amulet, we get a Presence of Cheula, which has great chaos resistance and gives a ton of energy shield by converting max life to energy shield. Also note here that we make sure we want to 20% quality our amulet and rings to give them that extra 20% additional attribute modifiers. We're pretty short on dex and strength in this build, so we need as much as we can get on our gear as possible. Moving on to our shield, we get a Prism Guardian, which lets us convert some of our ores into blood magic and makes them stronger with +2 to levels. On top of that, it gives us some nice all resistance and much needed dexterity. Try and get a corrupted one with physical damage from hits taken as cold or fire. We have very high elemental resistances, so this gives us nice defensive boost against physical damage. For our rings, we're going to pick up 2 Vivinsect rings, which mega buffs our auras inside of them. It gives great all attributes, which you actually need to divine for close to 25, which is max, and then again, like I said, 20% quality it to at least 28, but preferably 30, which is the maximum. It also gives 15 ES regen per second per uncorrupted item equipped, which turns out to be a ton of ES per second. Now, these come from Unveils from June, and you can pick up a crafted modifier alongside it. I think the best ones to have are number 1 being shock nearby enemies for 3 seconds when you focus, which turns out to be a flat 15% more damage for 3 seconds versus bosses, which is absolutely huge. And number 2 being +1 to minimum endurance charge for some nice defense. For our body armor, we're going to be going with a Shavron's Wrappings, which makes chaos damage not bypass our energy shield, and is why we can go low life without taking a chaos inoculation node on the tree. Getting a 6-link and then the right colors on this is going to be the most expensive part of the build, and it's going to cost you upwards of 10 exalts depending on how lucky you get to roll it. I would honestly suggest buying a 6 white socket corrupted shavs. I got mine for 9 exalts and then sold my old shavs for 6 exalts, so this came out to be only 3x spent for the white sockets, which is much better than having to try to 5 off color a shavs. Until you get that though, don't worry, you can spend a whopping 15 chaos and pick up a Solaris Lorica, which does the same thing but doesn't give any additional energy shield. So you're going to have a little bit lower energy shield, but it's not even going to be that big of a deal until you get into the high red tier maps and above. I used my Solaris Lorica until I started tier 14s and had about 4.5k energy shield, and it felt completely safe and I still never died. So it's a much cheaper option until you can afford that shabs. Moving on to our gloves and the only rare item in our build. We're just looking for high energy shield here, and the important stat to look out for is strike skills target one additional nearby enemy. This isn't required but adds some nice quality of life and smoother gameplay. I picked mine up for only 50 chaos. For our belt, we get a super cheap Darkness of Enthroned, which buffs the Abyss jewels in it by 75%. The two jewels we go for both give us strength, energy shield, and minions deal increased damage if you've used a minion skill recently, which we will be using all of the time from Flesh Offering and Convocation. It turns out to be 70% increased damage, which is huge. This is the best in slot belt until you can pick up a Torrent's Reclamation, which is about 9 exalts this league, and makes you rearrange your tree just a bit to get some extra strength elsewhere. It's a bit pricey to go from a 2C belt with 20C jewels to a 9X belt, but it gives you a ton of more damage, and the best part is it gives a ton of movement speed, which increases your clear speed significantly. For our boots, we get Sin Trek, which are super cheap even with the enchant 2% ES regen per second if you've been hit recently. It's still under 1 exalt, so not too bad. Again here, just make sure you divine it for high dexterity and energy shield. For our flasks, we do run a Taste of Hate, which gives 20% of physical damage taken during blast effect as cold damage, which again, we have super high cold resistances, so this is a huge defensive boost against physical damage. We also have a Granite Flask with increased armor, a Movement Speed Flask with increased movement speed or freeze immunity, your choice, and a Jade Flask with curse immunity, and a Quartz Flask with bleed immunity. And that covers it, guys. Overall, I'm having a blast with this build. The damage is seriously nuts, and the survivability is top tier, if not one of the best out there. It's definitely a build you can take to level 100 if you want as well. This can easily farm all in-game bosses, tier 16 100% delirious maps, and even speed farm with how fast your clear speed is. It's also more interactive than its Carrion Golem sister build, and I know a ton of people are looking for something just like that. I think the final thoughts on this build are for 50 million Shaper DPS, being absurdly tanky, having fast map clear times, and not having to buy those expensive primordial jewels on top of everything else, I'd say this build is definitely a top tier build and would highly recommend it. With that being said, if you enjoyed this guide or any of my other Path of Exile guides, do consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel for more build guides just like this. And if you really enjoy the content, maybe even consider subscribing to me on Patreon, where you're going to be supporting the channel as well as getting some access to my Discord server, where it's a lot easier and quicker to ask questions about your build reviews and gearing up questions, all that jazz. Anyways, that's all I got for this one, guys. Thanks everyone, and I will see y'all in the next one.